Go.
Welcome to my retro games series. I am Hominid Digital. In this series, I like to read passages from the bitmap books, the unofficial N64 visual compendium, and talk about each game and talk about my personal experience with it. So today's game will be Turok Dinosaur Hunter. We wanted to make the game an event. We were saying you may think you know everything about what first-person shooters are, but we want to show you what they can be. We really wanted to fire up people's imaginations. Games like Doom were extraordinarily limited to confined rectangular interior spaces. We wanted to do something that would open up. It's tame by today's standards, but at the time I think Turok had a grandeur about it. It felt bigger. It was more over the top in terms of what its weapons did and how the enemies reacted to being hit. Our particle effect system was very, very advanced for home consoles. We wanted to make PC fans go, holy crap, this is playing on a Nintendo machine that I just plug in. We really knew we were pushing Nintendo's tolerance for violence in a game on their console, but it turned out a lot of our fears were unfounded. They never wanted to see anything, or prove anything. That was from David Dienstbier. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. The producer of Turok. On to an interview with Remington Scott. Turok Dinosaur Hunter was one of the Nintendo 64's earliest hits, helping to establish the system as the destination for shooter-hungry console players. It also represented a major step forward in terms of 3D visuals and motion capture. Leading the charge on the latter front was Remington Scott, a world-renowned expert in the art of motion capture. Scott worked with Acclaim, guiding the process that led to Turok's expressive and lifelike enemies. Scott took the time to talk with us about the development of Turok Dinosaur Hunter, his decades-long interest in performance capture, and how video games have helped to push capture practices and technologies forward. Your resume is full of impressive projects, from games to film and more that have relied heavily on motion capture technology. What was your start in this field? Acclaim started it all. This was ground zero for motion capture productions in entertainment and specialized toolsets to retarget and animate the data. Before Acclaim built the first motion capture studio for entertainment, motion capture technology was mainly used in medical labs to analyze subjects walking on treadmills for hip replacement surgery. Acclaim was the largest publisher of digitized 2D games. Think Mortal Kombat. And it was a natural evolution to develop 3D digitization technologies. Motion capture at Acclaim completely changed animation production quality. What would you trace your interest in motion capture back to? I was an animator first, pencil on paper, stop motion, and keyframe computer animation. But motion capture was a quantum leap from any traditional animation techniques of the 20th century, and it came into my life at just the right time. I was becoming more disenchanted with traditional animation. Motion capture production was a social experiment. I wasn't alone at my desk animating. I was able to collaborate with talent. Directing motion capture sets in the beginning was the ultimate creative experience. Everything was new. I had the opportunity to devise new methodologies for a new kind of virtual production for the very first time. So much of what was improvised on those early sets has now become canon in the global digital entertainment industry. The detail and subtlety in the animation we produced was beyond anything an animator could keyframe. Even though there was more subtlety in the animation, it was actually faster produced than traditional animation. I fell in love with the ability to produce high fidelity content with faster timelines. One of your early gaming projects was Micro League Wrestling for the Amiga, Atari, Commodore 64, and DOS, a pioneering example of live actors being digitized for a video game. What led to that, and what did that process look like? Micro League Wrestling was released in 1987 and was the first digitized home video game. I was a junior in high school in 1986 when I started to work with Mike Rydell, who was the driving force and visionary behind the project. I was just fortunate to have been at the right place at the right time and open to the challenges that we were facing. Together, we created several digitized games, all featuring the WWF wrestlers, including match discs. 2 expansion discs that were offered with different wrestler matchups. We digitized images from videos of the wrestlers to create video games that were much more realistic looking than other games at that time. We were making them much faster as well. This was the beginning of home computers, and there was a belief that games could be made outside of the game console market. The idea that people would want to engage with entertainment on a home computer was part of the business thesis behind Micro League Wrestling. It was almost 10 years ahead of its time. Multimedia for PCs became the overwhelming trend in the 90s. Acclaim invested millions of dollars in motion capture technology in the 90s. What was your role within the company during that time? My role was interactive director. I was responsible for creating content using new technologies that were not available to all our developers. We would create technology stacks and then produce content with those technologies at the corporate headquarters, which would then be distributed to the global network of developers. Can you explain what made Acclaim's setup so advanced for the era? Acclaim spared no expense to create a truly impressive state of the art capture facility, but it was the software for manipulating the data that was the game changer. For almost a decade after Acclaim, video game developers and high end VFX companies working on blockbuster films attempted to use motion capture with terrible results, and many in the industry thought it was too difficult to work with. The custom toolsets Acclaim built to manipulate the motion capture data were on a quantum level above and beyond the rest of the industry. What did Acclaim's motion capture suite allow it to do that other companies at the time couldn't? Think of motion capture essentially like making a video of a person. After you have the video of your performer, can you go and change the way the performer moves? Can you move their foot to step at a different part of the screen or adjust the body to lean forward? That is not possible in video, and the same was true for motion capture. Motion capture records exactly what it sees, just like video. Acclaim created software so that you could reposition a foot, lean a character forward, or change just about any part of the performance. We were able to retarget from one sized human to a different sized human. We could seamlessly blend motions so that dozens of short actions could be combined to make the player feel like they are controlling or playing against an organic human character. The rest of the industry did not have this robust software toolset. Where does Turok Dinosaur Hunter come into the story? Turok Dinosaur Hunter was right time, right place. I had already spent hundreds of hours directing motion capture at Acclaim, mostly pressure testing and building methodologies. So when Paul Samulski, the VP of product development, assigned me to work with Iguana Studios to direct the motion capture of Turok, I was elated. The funny thing was that I wasn't familiar with the Turok properties at that time, but even just the concept was kick-ass, a Native American who hunts dinosaurs. And Iguana Studios was one of the best development studios Acclaim had. I walked out of that first meeting and knew there was massive potential. What did the process for human motion capture look like for Turok? It started with a detailed plan called a motion tree. This was a branching chart that often starts with neutral and passive actions like stand, idle, which would often be a looping action. Then it would chart the aggressive actions like fight stance with rifle. Then actions would branch from that, like look around or turn left. Branching from those actions would be motions like crouch aim, which would segue into crouch fire. In between these motions were what we called intermotions, which were pieces of motion that were blended and could be shortened due to how fast the digital character would react. The overall flow of all these motions could add up to an on-screen animation like an enemy is standing and wiping the sweat off his brow. He hears something and turns towards you, sees you, and crouches to hide behind a rock. Then he aims his rifle and fires at you. The more motion clips we shot, the more thoughtful and dynamic the enemy characters became. So eventually they were ducking, evading, offensively and defensively moving. They would jump down from high places, throw grenades, wipe out while running, evade roll, leap forward, and smash with their rifle or sword. There were actions where the enemy was riding on the back of dinosaurs, such as the Pteranodon or Triceratops. Enemies were sometimes walking their dinosaurs, holding their reins, or riding them on saddle. To achieve these actions across such a diverse number of characters, I brought on Brad Martin, a young stunt performer who had the focus and dynamic capabilities to become the archetypal enemy. Whether he was riding a dinosaur or chasing you on foot, Brad was able to hit a mark perfectly, take after take. Each time we shot an action, he had added a sense of realism and spontaneity that felt like it was a natural reaction and not some kind of rehearsed technical motion. Working with Brad, my goal was to create actions that felt edgy and real. We weren't going for caricatures or exaggeration. We also blew 'em up quite a lot. Grenades would be lobbed by the player, and based on where they landed in proximity to the enemy, they would cause the enemy motion to be impacted accordingly. So Brad was blown up from the right, left, behind, in front. He was shot off of flying dinosaurs and charging dinosaurs. He was lifted and shaken as if he were being eaten by a T Rex. We had a blast. How did the Nintendo 64's hardware and performance affect what you could implement in terms of animation? Initially, we shot and created as much action as we could within the parameters that were given to us by the Advanced Technology Group, ATG. They were actively developing new compression algorithms to compress the actions so we could fit more in. The R&D team was led by Mark Schaefer with David Minogue and Jim Herzner working on motion compression. In their offices, I was playing the unlimited version of Turok. This was the ultimate version of Turok Dinosaur Hunter, featuring every single piece of motion and animation running on their developer kit, with seemingly unlimited hard drive space. We spent weeks together playing and tweaking the motions. It was an incredible leap from any game that was created before, due to the rich nature of the organic motion and the N64's robust 3D processors. Enemies were fluid in their actions. The screen was filled with dinosaurs and humans, and transitions between their motions were smooth and seamless. As a gamer, I couldn't get enough. Within a short time, as word leaked out between departments, Acclaim HQ employees from different departments crowded around the screens at ATG to watch and queue up for a chance to play. How did necessities like distance fogging factor into Turok's animation? The decision by Nintendo to go with cartridges meant that the storage space for N64 games would be limited to the amount of drive storage each cartridge could contain, which was a fraction of what a CD could store. Building a cartridge with more data storage meant the cost would increase, and this was passed on to the consumer. Some N64 games were sold for upwards of $70 USD. The reason being is that the publisher would have to pay Nintendo to create each cartridge, which would cost the game publisher upwards of $30 to $40 for each cartridge. There was an economic factor in how much a publisher was willing to spend upfront on a game. If a publisher pays $40 to Nintendo to create each cartridge, then sells the game at $60, the publisher's gross is $20. This is split with the retailer, netting the publisher around $10 per game they sell. The publisher is taking a massive risk. In the case of Turok Dinosaur Hunter, Acclaim needed to find a way to reduce the cost of the game to earn higher margins. The only way to make that happen was to reduce the required storage size. This meant that the diversity of motion that we created, as well as mini characters, had to be cut from the final game. Although the ATG had made incredible gains in compression, there was still content that would not make it into the final game. Unfortunately for the fans, the ultimate Turok game lives only in our memories. This is why the Fog of War was created as well, because the rendering system could not handle so many polygons. Have there been any other video game projects you've worked on that you're particularly proud of? I loved working on the Spider-Man and Resistance franchise games. The characters and actions are next level. The Order 1887 was like filming a 6-hour-long interactive animated film. Directing the cinematic scenes for Call of Duty Advanced Warfare was like living inside the game. When we discussed the direction of that game, it was clear we were in new territory, as we were looking to create strong bonds between players and their digital human teammates. My goal was to create deep human engagements between characters that tested the player's ability to earn trust with characters that would ultimately betray you, or learn that some enemies would need to be trusted. Your motion capture work hasn't just been limited to video games, you've also had a storied career in film. How did your work in video games help lead to film? Hollywood was tepid in its interest in motion capture. There were moments when a stunt was motion captured, but the majority of animation was firmly embedded in the caricatures of Disney cartoons. So, it was no surprise to me that a video game company, Square, decided to create the first hyper-realistic animated feature film. Much of the innovation in Hollywood comes from the video game industry. I was literally playing Final Fantasy VII when my phone rang and a producer, Jun Ada, asked me if I was interested in working on as the motion capture line producer on the Final Fantasy film. I remember saying I literally had to pause FF7 to take this call. I became the motion capture director for Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. Could you tell us more about the work you did on Final Fantasy The Spirits Within? What parts were you mostly directly involved with? Final Fantasy The Spirits Within was the first theatrically released feature film in which all the principal characters were motion captured. It was a groundbreaking achievement for all involved and has since set the precedent for performances by actors playing digital identities in the feature film context. I was responsible for all the performance capture sessions, productions, the data, and the animation team. All the digital sets were created physically on the 18,000 square foot motion capture soundstage at Diamond Head in Hawaii, the stage that was initially built but barely used for Jurassic Park. You also helped to implement Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. What was the process like? How did you transform the 5 foot 7 inch Andy Serkis into an ancient, gnarled 4 foot halfling? Peter Jackson was deep into The Lord of the Rings The Fellowship when he saw Gollum test footage from the Weta animation team. That's when he reached out to me. He had seen the footage from Final Fantasy The Spirits Within and wanted to know if there was a way I could do a motion capture test to determine if he could use the motion capture methodology to drive the Gollum puppet. I met with Andy Serkis, who was primarily hired for a short period of time to do Gollum's voice acting, and we immediately started to experiment with Andy in a motion capture suit. We pulled together some test footage, and when we presented it to Peter, it was clear that this was going to be the new tool set for Weta to create realistic human characters. I expanded the motion capture studio, building the infrastructure and pipeline to quickly move the data through the facility. I also built up the motion editing team to handle more data. Over 65 hours of motion capture data were used in The Lord of the Rings The Two Towers, including much of the Battle of Helm's Deep and the orcs and ents. But the star was Gollum Smeagol. To build an environment that fostered the kind of character building that Andy Serkis was exploring, I utilized the Acclaim motion capture system, which allowed for real-time visualization. We were watching Gollum in real time on a screen and speaking to Gollum, and Gollum would react. It was a breakthrough that set up Weta Digital as a leader in performance capture. What would you say you prefer working on, video games or movies? This is not a cop out. I love both, and we're now seeing a crossover between the two that is paving the way for engaging entertainment for the rest of this century. I also believe user generated content will play an important part in the future of performance capture and scalable, engaging digital humans. Motion capture has obviously grown in big ways over the past few decades. What are some ways you think it could continue to perform in the future? Motion capture and performance capture are recipes that mix technology and human emotions into a digital chip. In the 20th century, the technology that was used to capture performances was film. It was a photochemical process on strips of celluloid. The 20th century is the most documented period of mankind due to film technology. Now, in the 21st century, humanity has shifted from film to computer chips. Everything that humans are doing today and tomorrow is recorded and documented on computer chips. Our emotions are now important signature components of our source code for the digital DNA that is our identity. So, yeah, that's a really cool article to read. I hope it was as enjoyable to listen to as it was for me to read. I didn't know most of that stuff. I didn't know that Acclaim was at least partially responsible for how good Gollum looks in the second and third Lord of the Rings, along with Andy Serkis's incredible motion capture work. So yeah, Turok Dinosaur Hunter was and is one of my all-time favorite first-person shooters. It started the whole experience for me with that kind of game, with being able to, with the collection of more and more ridiculous guns that you would find and build in the case of the Chronoceptor, which is essentially intended to be only an in-game weapon, but if you cheat it in, you can play around with it anywhere. It's a really cool weapon. Yeah, it's crazy knowing that Remington Scott was so involved with all these different properties that I know about and that I've seen and taken in. But I love hearing that he worked on that he was so involved in all this stuff, and he was involved in Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. I love that movie. It's such a good movie. I just wish it didn't have Final Fantasy in the title, because I feel like it's so far removed from anything in the other properties, in the other titles that could be considered part of the same series, that doesn't really feel like it belongs. It's a good movie, but it's very different, very different from the various Final Fantasy titles, which I didn't play much of. But that's because I didn't really have PlayStation, and I think the only game I played very far was Crystal Chronicles, if I'm remembering the name correctly, which is on GameCube. But yeah, I love Turok. I used to play the shit out of this game when I was a kid, and all the animations were so interesting. It's cool to hear like what kind of technology they were using to make that happen. I knew that there was like I knew a little bit from the books that I had read because I had like a guide for Turok, one of the old I don't remember. I mean, maybe it was the official Acclaim uh, guide. It's a very thorough book that told you like every little secret that you could get to, and had a bunch of the cheat codes in the back. And something I didn't really realize because I didn't play the game like all the way through enough, and I wasn't like good enough at it to find this out. But some of the cheat codes will actually pop up on the screen while you're playing if you meet certain requirements, like maxing out your lives and maxing out your whatever the little triangles are that add up to having another life. You get 100 of the triangles, you get a life. And yeah, the infinite lives cheat code pops up when you actually do that. Yeah, Turok was probably my first experience with a 3D first person shooter. Well, was my first experience with a first person shooter and my first experience with a platformer shooter that also had secrets to it and where you had to really explore and find things. Otherwise, you wouldn't find the chronoceptor. You wouldn't find all the keys. And if you don't find all the keys, you're not beating the game. And I confess, I never beat the game as a kid. I still haven't actually legitimately beaten it. I've cheated my way through it just because I never really had the time to sit down and beat it all, and I was only allowed to play for so long. Otherwise, I would just play forever when I was a kid. Yeah, it's very interesting to learn that there's this connection between this great old game and several movies that several movies and several other games that are more modern that people may or may not know of. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know about Lord of the Rings, but maybe a lot less know about Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within nowadays. But it was a technological marvel when it came out. It was a gorgeous piece of cinema, which probably looks pretty dated nowadays, but at the time that was an technical achievement beyond anything I would say most people knew was possible, other than those that were already in the industry. The enemy AI in Turok Dinosaur Hunter was also just like extra impressive. Like I know it was dumb at times, but it was also really smart at times. Like the moments when enemies would start fighting each other, and you'd accidentally have like it had to be like two different species. It couldn't be a hunter or it couldn't be a poacher and another poacher. It had to be like a poacher shoots one of the purlins or shoots one of the raptors by accident trying to hit you. Then the raptor would turn around and go after them and attack them. That was the first time I'd ever seen a game do something like that, where the AI would suddenly become aggressive towards another AI, where one NPC would suddenly attack another NPC because like, hey, you shot me in the back. What the fuck? So it was cool to like bait them into different situations where you could see these things happen. And yeah, just the over the top weapons, all the really cool NPCs that you'd find and fight, and the boss fights were really cool. The Long Hunter was I remember that being an incredible challenge. That was probably one of the only ones, probably the only boss that I made it to legitimately. I might have gotten to the Mantis as well, but I remember the Long Hunter being a really difficult fight until I got like the strategy down for fighting the Jeep and avoiding the Jeep's attacks, and then getting to just the Long Hunter, and the Long Hunter would just turn around and kick your ass because he was so fast. You had to really use the strategy of moving both forward and to the side at the same time, because then you would double your movement speed, and that was the only way you could like stay ahead of your enemies usually. Especially something as fast as the Long Hunter, you had to be really quick to move out of the way when he would attack. And I don't know if it was intentional or if it's something that was just a bug in the game, but there were a fun bug to use was to do was in the boss battles, certain weapons would cause Turok's animation to be messed up. So if you're fighting the Long Hunter and you use the freeze cannon, whatever it was, this particle cannon that would shoot out like different colored particles, and it would freeze your opponent. Obviously, it wouldn't work on the Long Hunter, but if you destroyed him with the particle cannon, it would cause Turok's leg to like stick off to the side during his animation after he beat the boss. And then the same thing would happen with the campaigner, but you use the minigun to beat him, which would obviously be an insane feat if you're doing that without cheats. But yeah, it still took a while, even with cheats and infinite ammo. But then you'd get to sit there and watch Turok like running through to the end of the game, like he beats the campaigner, and then he's just standing there with his leg all broken to the side. And then he has to run all the way through the halls and jump out of the building with his leg all wonky. It looks like he just got injured mid-fight or something, and he had to battle through the pain. I really love all the weird cheats too, the ones that were just for aesthetics, like when you could the one that is "Do you like to draw," which just removes the textures and just shows like the base animation models. So it's like all black and white, and it's incredibly difficult to see anything if you're, depending on the stage, like you cannot tell where you are. But it's just like a fascinating thing to observe. And pretty colors, so you could just have everything all pretty. And then the one that turns off anti-aliasing, so everything's all really, I think it does more than just turn off the anti-aliasing. I think it uses like the more basic textures. Call that animation, I think, is the cheat. But yeah, man, if Turok Dinosaur Hunter, just absolutely one of the essential pieces of history as far as first-person shooters go. And I know it's by far nowhere near the first-person shooter, obviously. There's a million before it, many versions of Doom and Doom likes out there, and Quake, and so many others, Hexen and all those, which I guess is kind of a Doom like, but magical. But for me, yeah, Turok was the first big one, the first first-person shooter ever for me, and a great one. Still a fun game today. Although I was definitely fighting with my emulator to try and get the controls right, which you can see in a lot of the footage where every time I try to look left or right, I'm also looking up or down. And it's not an issue of the controller, because the controller was a genuine N64 controller in pretty good condition. It was just dealing with the dead zones and sensitivity settings on RetroArch. It's hard to get it just right. But yeah. Thank you again to Bitmap Books for giving me permission to use their to the little snippets of their books. This was an especially long one. I didn't realize that it was going to go into so much detail, and that it would be so relevant to so many other things. That there was so much work that came from early acclaim that has affected not only the game industry but the movie industry. It's really cool to read about all this stuff. So yeah, thanks to Bitmap Books, and if you haven't checked them out, you should. If you like reading about this kind of stuff, there's a lot of books out there. This one is from this article, or this snippet was from N64, a visual compendium. But there are books on Atari, books on just like a whole bunch of retro ones. They just released a like the 50 most important indie video games, and yeah, they're not sponsoring me. I just think they're really cool, so check them out. And as always, be good to yourself, be good to each other, and have a good day. Bye bye.